Good morning. I should also say that a lot of people look at stuff that I do in the city and say it's very interesting, it's very inspiring. But for me, really, people like Mr. Ramakant are the real heroes. They are people who are known in their neighborhood, known for the right things, and you can point to them and say, this is the kind of person that I want my child to be, my friend to be, and myself to be, and stuff. Fundamentally, each of us has a certain idea of what we are trying to be, not just what we are trying to achieve. And I think these things are becoming more and more possible only through collaboration in large systems in society. We live in a city of 10 million people. It's not a joke to run any city of 10 million people. Anywhere else in the world, to run a city of 10 million people takes an administrative apparatus and a political machine that is so powerful, sophisticated, delivery-oriented, that it's just no comparison. If you go to Shanghai, if you go to London, if you go to New York, similarly sized cities in terms of people, they are running in very different modes. And unfortunately in India we just don't have that mode of public administration and political leadership for problem solving. So we have to come about it in a different way. We can't really expect to replicate London or New York or Shanghai or any of those systems. We can't, because simply we don't have the political and the administrative machinery to replicate that. And what people like Ramakant sir and myself have been saying for quite some time is that the only alternative to this formal structure of government which delivers outcomes is that the informal structure has to be powerful enough to take its place and achieve the same outcomes itself. I always said to people, I'm a citizen of this place and therefore a member of the government of this place. I'm not saying that government is separate from me. Government includes you, government includes me. There are certain kinds of government having to do with file movement, signatures by somebody, decision making, formal things, what you and I call Vidhan Sodha, MS building, all those things. Those are about file movement. But they are not necessarily the whole of government. Government is a system, Prajaprabhutva. It's a system of people working together to actually solve public problems. And most of us, when we talk about government, this is what we really mean. I always encourage people, remove the word government and ask yourself what equivalent phrase you would use to describe government. And by and large, when most people talk about government, what they mean is public problem solving. That what they want government to do is solve public problems. This is fundamentally the reality that most people's understanding of government comes from that. When we talk about roads, for example, you want people to fix the roads. Now, the question really comes back to you is, if you could fix the road yourself, would you do it? And I'm sure for 99%, if not 100% of you, the answer would be yes. If you could fix the road yourself, why wouldn't you do it? And some of you would even go to the extent of saying, if I could fix the road myself, even at a small cost to myself, I would still do it. And I'm sure there are some people like that as well. Even at supposing I were to come and say, look, $1,000 from each one of you, this road will be fixed. I'm sure I can walk out of here with $20,000 if you actually believe that $1,000 from each one of you would fix the road. But what it really means is that fundamentally what we lack is the autonomy for public problem solving. It's not so much that we lack the intent or the initiative or any of those things. We really don't have the authority to solve public problems. How do you create a system in which you have formal authority to solve some of these problems as well? This is what we've historically looked at. How do you contest elections? How do you become IAS officer? How do you become, whatever, various things that decide outcomes. How do you become corporator? How do you become MLC, MLA, all that stuff. But you don't actually have to do that. By and large, you need to reach a scenario where the other day I was in some other community, some Kadidaspura, some other part of town, where some road digging, usual BWSSB nonsense was going on. And some guys were just essentially complaining that BWSSB came and randomly dug the road, didn't resurface it. Usual problem that I'm sure throughout HSR you notice these kind of things. And they asked me, what do you do when these kinds of things happen in your neighborhood? We said, by and large, these things don't happen in our neighborhood. Right? If you talk to Ramakant sir also, he said, by and large, these things don't happen in his neighborhood. You know why? Because he's watching what happens in his neighborhood. Because he's on top of that information. He keeps a lot more people informed of that information. Because he studies the administrative apparatus that is carrying out the work and pushes that apparatus to finish its work quickly. If we knew this, a lot of things can be solved. The basic problem in public administration and governance today is what I call asymmetry of information. BBMP budget is going to be presented in 4 days. 4 days from now, BBMP budget is going to be presented. For HSR layout area, how many of you know what are the things that are included in the BBMP budget? Very few. If any, I would be surprised. but very few usually. And it's not particularly a problem to HSR layout. You go to any ward and ask this question, this will largely be true. But there are some words, this is what I want you to understand, there are some words where the answer is not, I don't know, where they actually know the answer. And the words that know the answer are the ones that get the money. You first need to internalize this. The places where people know what is going on in government get the money from government to make things go on. I'm not only talking about, corruption as the way of knowing these kinds of things. Even from a purely citizenship point of view, if you actually knew what was going on in HSR layout, you would be more likely to get a portion of BBMP money for the work that is carried out in HSR. This is the truth. So one of the first things to internalize is if something is wrong in your neighborhood, the asymmetry of information is one of the biggest reasons. And as long as you allow the asymmetry of information to continue, you will continue to have problems. So the first thing to do is to say, I'm going to break the asymmetry of information, make myself reasonably knowledgeable about what is going on in BBMP. Second is to become a channel for that information. If you know something, it has a certain value, nobody doubts that. But the minute you communicate it to a few more people, 5 more people, 10 more people, or 5,000 more people, the power of that information actually multiplies in a huge way. And the third thing that it allows you to do is to bring your elected representative into that matrix. To be able to go to, I think Lata is your corporator in this area, to be able to go to her and say, this is what we want done in HSR layout. We want you to make sure that it is properly included in the BBMP budget for this year. Or when the ward allocation is made for HSR layout, these are the things that we want you to work on. If you are not part of the input process, you actually have no skin in the game. In all systems, whether it's a political system or even a sports system or any administrative system, if you don't have skin in the game, then you're not part of the outcome. This is a well-established truth. Do you have skin in the game, as they say? Right? Are you willing to devote the energy needed to actually create the outcomes that you care about? This is the fundamental question that all of us ask. And I think there's a way to do this without placing unreasonable expectations on a lot of people. I mean, lots of guys say, sir, how many people can leave their job, leave their profession, leave their families and go and spend time on solving these problems? And the first answer to all of that is you don't actually need to do that. You don't actually need to do that. Anybody who thinks you need to leave your job, your family and not to go solve these problems is thoroughly mistaken. They haven't the foggiest idea what goes on in government. You first simply need to say, I want to keep myself informed. This is the only thing that you need to. In fact, the first thing you need to do is not do anything for others, but to do something for yourself. You say, I am going to keep myself informed. This is the very first thing you need to do. And I assure you, if you take only this one step, all the other steps will come automatically. Because the consequence of being informed about anything else is that it makes your mind think about what can you do in response to that information. So if you tell yourself, I'm going to be informed, automatically all the next steps will happen. In a typical city like Bangalore, there are all these usual challenges. There are multiple departments, multiple civic agencies, and you really don't know who's responsible for what, and what stage of planning and implementation each of those agencies is. BWSSB is doing something called 4-stage implementation of underground drainage in all the peri-urban areas. This is supposed to cover the entire city by 2014 or 2015. If you go to any peri-urban area like HSR, even Vamanali, any of these areas, and ask people, what is the status of BWSSB's underground drainage system in your area? Most people again don't know the answer. Right? Westcoms recently came up with its plan called limited use, unlimited power. This is a scheme that they announced. And after 6 months of pushing them, I've got them to launch the scheme. Now I have to make sure it works well. But most people at the community level don't actually know what the scheme does and how it works. In fact, how well a conservation scheme works depends not on BESCOM, it depends on you. It's an interesting thing. If you go to BESCOM, now actually if you go to BESCOM and say what is the current status of the scheme, most people will not be able to tell you. But if you go to BESCOM and say, sir, we want to participate in this scheme and conserve energy, tell us how to do it. In the mere process of telling you how to do it, the scheme will become more and more popular, not only in HSR but in other communities as well. Essentially what I'm saying is, if you put yourself in the information channel, you actually begin to get a very different kind of profit. So one of the things that we are trying to do through One Bengaluru and lots of other initiatives around the city is to say, let us create this information channel that allows each of us to know what the solution strategy for a lot of problems is, and in the process of discovering the solution strategy, make that strategy known to more and more people so that more and more people are participating in that outcome. This is fundamentally, I feel, a very doable exercise. All it requires you to do is to make two commitments to yourself. That A, you will keep yourself informed. B, once you are informed of something, that you will share that knowledge and information with more people so that a wider community of people who know these things emerges. These are such trivial things to do. And nowadays, especially in a community like this, it's very easy to understand also. With information platforms for sharing knowledge and information, it's so trivial to build some of these kind of things. You know, I can sit here and build information platforms for 10 cities around the country. It's not that hard. It's possible for each of us to become a repository of knowledge about governance in our city and to become a distributor of that knowledge to each of the communities that we live in. If this task is taken up reasonably seriously, we will find that the political system responds to you that much better because you know stuff. And ultimately, power is about knowing stuff. Power is about asymmetry of information. If you break the asymmetry of information, then you have as much power as anybody else. And therefore, we want to actually do this as an information sharing exercise and a best practices exercise in solving public problems. This is what I think is achievable. It sounds abstract at a level, but it has very practical things. Now, I know when we try to run the Big Ten bus, for example, like when some 6 weeks ago, they started air-conditioned Big Ten bus services on some of the routes, right? On Hosur Road, on Bannerghatta Road, on Whitefield Road. These were the first roads on which Big Ten buses started running in air-conditioned buses, what they call AC1, AC2, and so on. I don't know whether there is yet an AC2 service on Sarjapur Road. It was supposed to start running this month. But why I'm saying this is, what decides whether there's going to be AC1 or AC2 or AC3? There are 12 routes. What decides which of these 12 routes is going to run in air-conditioned bus service? And the answer is very simple. The communities that go and push for it will get it. The communities that don't push for it will take time getting it. This is the simplest truth. In fact, I've heard people complain and say, sir, it's not fair that BMTC runs bus services in your neighborhood and RK's neighborhood and a few other places where people are going and talking to them. I say it's completely fair. It's completely fair if BMTC runs bus services in my neighborhood the way I want it. What is not fair, you can say, is that they're not running bus in your neighborhood the way you want it. But that's not because of power. It's because of lack of your participation in your system. If you participate in your system, they're as accountable to you as to anybody else. It's not like I'm wielding some stick and saying you will do this or anything like that. Each of us has the potential to make the public administration system do the things that we want in our neighborhood. But an important part of making that outcome happen is to participate in the process of demanding that thing and to collaborate with public officials in creating those kind of things. I think we can do this. Today, it's a combination of technology, media, communication, really stuff that we are all so much in control of at an individual level. The internet was supposed to be a democratizing medium for a lot of us. It was meant to create the capacity of each citizen to participate in public systems should have been hugely accelerated by the internet. We haven't really seen that much in India, partly because the internet is not everywhere, but it's changing also. Now 4G service, the other day we tried out Airtel 4G in my office at Map Unity. Airtel 4G seems 3 times better than broadband from any of the other services. And I'm sure if these sorts of things drop in price and catch up, lots more people will get online in the next few years. We must turn this opportunity into a real one where we actually collaborate through information by virtue of having access to these technologies. And I think communities like this one, or even a neighborhood like Ichizadeo, have a phenomenal role to play. These are the communities where you can make these things happen first. Because these are the communities with the highest levels of linkages to information across various systems. These are the communities with the highest capacity to share that information and push for change. And I think this is the real opportunity before us. For 60 plus years, we've been waiting for a kind of politics that delivers in a very hierarchical way the outcomes that we're looking for. What we must conclude now is that that's not going to happen. Even if you wait 60 more years, the hierarchical system can't deliver the kind of India that you dream about. What you need is a collaborative system in which you are building that India, rather than a hierarchical system in which that India is merely delivered to you. And in this collaborative system, the effectiveness and the power of that collaborative system depends on our own participation in that system. Any collaborative system is only as powerful as the inputs of the various collaborators themselves. So what I'm asking each one of us to do is to say, let's be part of this collaboration systems. People like me, people like Mr. Ramakant, we know how to fix a lot of things in this city, because we've done it before in different neighborhoods. Sometimes it worked because of fluke. I'm also not going to pretend like everything worked because I was like a great problem solver or something like that. Sometimes things work because of fluke. But it's important to even then to understand the thing and say, what's the fluke here? Can we repeat this fluke somewhere else? Even to be able to repeat flukes, you have to document the fluke and be able to understand why it worked and why it did not work elsewhere. Sometimes there have been successes that people in hindsight will conclude these are not really successful. And you have to learn from that too. I feel there are many more problems that we can solve together, and that's the real exciting thing. Many of you who live in this area, if you want to go to a nice public outdoor space, you don't need to go to Kabul Park, you don't need to go to Lal Park. These are too far away. You know, Kaikondroli Lake is much closer, and it's as nice as an outdoor space as any other part of the city. Now, if you can do that in 180 lakes in the city, imagine the power of that kind of development. If there are 180 lakes and 10,000 people benefit from access to a public space like a lake, that's 2 million people in the city who can actually have a great public outdoor space simply because they choose to maintain it themselves. And this is the kind of power that can come from collaboration in a way that government can never deliver. The cost of maintaining 200 lakes a year in BBMP budget is simply not, it's not tenable. BBMP doesn't have that kind of money. So for us, we have to say, given that the public administration structure is weak, what is it that we can do to overcome that deficit? And that's constantly the question. And I believe for most of us, the answer is the city. You and I don't benefit from that. We don't live there. Fundamentally, I believe that it's in everybody's vested interest to be part of a problem-solving exercise which delivers value, economic value, social value in their own neighborhoods, using their own inputs and their own power. And I think it can be a very uplifting experience for a lot of people and a great lesson in what democracy can achieve as well. If we pull this off nicely, even in a few communities in Bangalore, I'm sure it would take off as well and become a much larger exercise throughout the city and in other parts of the country as well. We'll discuss specifics of how to engage with individual agencies as we go forward. I invite Mr. Ramakant to say a few words.
Yeah, so before you can I ask one question?
If you go to the Urban Development Department and say, why is the community participation law not being implemented? Their answer will be, sir, we are drawing up the rules for implementation of the law. But it's not a bad answer compared to what they had 2 years ago, 3 years ago. This is a better answer. They are not saying we haven't even passed the law or we won't do it. Now they are in a position of saying we passed the law, we are in the process of doing it. If 10 of us sit down their head and say we want the damn thing to be done now, it will happen. So essentially this is the way progress happens. Like Mr. Ramakant was saying, perseverance is the most important weapon that you can bring to this thing. And community and governments respond to the most perseverant people. They essentially try to outlast you. More than anything else, they try to outlast you. It's only when they become convinced that you will outlast them, they actually begin to work with you. And that convincing is really something only we can create. But we can do that. Like I said, I hope to be back in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe in this hall only, and for all of us to actually formally launch the Bhavnali campaign. I want to do that, but let's make this a properly investigated exercise in which we learn our capacity to carry out that campaign as well.
But do you think these two powers are required, money and muscle?
No. I want you to understand this. In Bhavnali constituency, let's talk about Bhavnali only. I posted this on my Facebook blog, some of you know this. In Bhavnali constituency the last time, 44% of the people who were eligible to vote, I'm not talking about people sitting in their house, 44% of the people who were eligible to vote came to the voting booth. Okay. Out of that, I think 46 or 48% of the people voted for Satish. So totally he got a vote for 18 to 19% of the people who were eligible to vote. The number of people who were eligible to vote that did not get on the roll was about 15 to 20%. The number of people who were eligible to vote but did not come to vote was 56% of that number. The number of people who came to vote and did not vote for Satish Reddy was another 44%. So actually if you look at it, the number of people who voted for the winner was 1/3 the number of people who could have voted but did not choose him. Really, this is what's happened throughout every constituency in India. There's a guy in parliament elected from UP. He lost his deposit. So in India, when you contest an election, you have to put a deposit in to make sure that only serious people contest the election. They take a deposit from you. If you don't get 1 out of 6 votes, that is, if you get less than 16% of the vote, you lose your deposit. This guy lost his deposit, but he was still first. He was still first, and therefore he became a member of parliament. What it tells you is that most people are elected by extraordinarily slim majorities of eligible people voting. I believe that the number of people that we can mobilize to vote in a new Bhavnali campaign is several times higher than the number of people who selected the last candidate, and that a fair chunk of people who selected the last candidate would also vote for our candidate if we pushed for that kind of thing. All of this is doable, but it requires momentum. Money and muscle are not the key. It requires momentum. Momentum brings money. And I don't think we need massive amounts of money. Money can be substituted through effort. Fundamentally, in elections today, we have a system in which nobody talks to you as an individual voter. Even when people come and ask for your vote, I remember the last time the municipal corporation elections were held, the lady who eventually became corporator, she came to my house. She had a picture of herself and her husband with me. She showed these two pictures to me and said, vote for BJP. That was the full pitch. You know, she was showing this picture and said, vote for BJP. So I said, Niyarma. Okay, she hadn't even introduced herself. She was basically going around door to door and showing this picture and saying, vote for BJP. Then I asked